So this is just your standard run-of-the-mill extra select olive marabou. I mean, you think, well, that's extra select, so it must be better. And it is really good marabou, but it's also huge feathers. And you can see this feather is probably at least 6 inches long. Super good for tying big streamers, palmering around the streamer. But for this, a lot of the feathers they're not webby enough. For example, if I go out to the tip here, you can see that I have just some little straight fibers. I don't have those really nice webby fibers. Now I can come down in the body. I'm not saying you can't tie with these. That would actually be pretty good right there. But for these little buggers, the woolly bugger marabou is probably the best way to go. And then there's really small marabou. This is grizzly marabou, and this is a mini marabou. That's really good for like tying poppers sometime, just any kind of small type fly that you want to tie. This is a bar. This is a grizzly barb. I don't use the mini marabou much anymore. I really like the woolly bugger marabou. So that's what we're going to tie with tonight. And I'll pile all this over here and get out of our way, because these really webby fibers make excellent buggers. Okay. All right, as far as hooks go, you've heard me talk about this hook before. This particular hook is a J. Stockard hook, and it is their number. Oh, I'm sorry, this particular one is a 555. It's an Umpqua hook. It's exactly the same as the J. Stockard 604 hook, but this particular one's an Umpqua 555. But if you go to J. Stockard's site, there's 604. It's their jig hook, and it has a much, I'm gonna put it in my vise so you can see it here. It has a much longer shank than typical jig hooks do. Typical jig hook, 14 jig hook would probably be about that long, whereas this one's a much longer shank, which is better for a woolly bugger. We are tying with 1/8 inch. These are standard brass beads. If you want to use tungsten, to get a little better sink rate, you can certainly do that. And then I talked about the marabou. The body that you have is, let me get a package to show you here. This is mid-sized diamond braid, and this is peacock. It's great for wrapping bodies. Mid-sized diamond braid. Peacock color, it comes in black, comes in all sorts of colors, but it's great for wrapping small bodies like this. Now, there's as many ways to tie a woolly bugger as there is to make gumbo. So, it's like whatever you want to choose for it. So, but we're going to use that. And for hackle, we have some of you, I think Peter and Flip, you both have this Ewing hackle, which is a half cape. There's also these are probably the best values out there. This is a grizzly one. Some of you here have the grizzly colored and a half cape. These are about $20, and it's a half rooster cape. And it has a lot of, let me take it out of the package. Probably the best value for the dollar. And I use grizzly for almost everything. It has a lot of, as you can see, very small hackle fiber. So for small, either soft hackles, actually these are roosters, so you can use them for dry flies as well. And it has a ton of the bigger feathers like you would get in a bugger pack for like size 6, 8, and 10 woolly buggers. So really a good value for hackle. Okay, so let's, for thread, we're going to use olive, I guess 70 denier will work, 140, whatever you like. Any of those will work just fine. And again, the bead is a 1/8 inch bead. So let's get started. And you'll notice, for those of you that haven't tied before, you'll notice your bead has a small hole and a large hole. So you want to put the hook point, and I don't know if you can see it. I can't see it on the camera, sort of. It has a small hole and a large hole. You want to put the hook point through the small hole. And the beads you have are not slotted beads. slotted is typically a tungsten bead. These are brass beads, so they're not slotted, but they work just fine on this jig hook. So we have our hook fixed in the vise, and start the thread behind the bead. We'll start behind the bead, and we're going to wrap back. On this hook, the bend starts just above the barb. So I'm going to wrap back to just above the barb. And then I'm going to just wrap forward back to behind the bead again. So I have effectively laid down a thread base. Jim, how's my exposure up there?
Well, you got olive on there. Probably all right.
Is it a little hot?
No, it's not hot. Come back up.
Okay. Okay. All right, good. Now choose one of your feathers. It doesn't matter which one. Now with this feather, I can tie at least 2 flies. And I don't want you to necessarily do this, but I'm going to show you how I like to tie 2 flies with this feather. For this fly, I'm only going to use the tip. I'm only going to use the tip section of it. And our tail only needs to be about as long as the shaft of the hook. So that's way too long. So I'm going to come down about like that for my tail. So I want it about as long as the hook. So I take that measurement and I put the front, the length of my tail, I put the front right over the bend of the hook and then transfer it. I'm a right-handed tire. I transfer it back to my left hand and then start tying it down. It's going to look like a mess, just wrap toward the back.
Don't cut it yet.
Don't cut it yet, no. And my tail's a little bit too long, so let me unwrap some here. If you get a little bit too long, just unwrap a little bit and then just pull your marabou forward and you can shorten it right up.
You make a light one like this, you still can pull this. Make it short if it looks too long. You have to pull it under that light rest.
And it may not look like much of a tail, but remember, this is a pretty small fly. It's a pretty small bugger. And then once you get it wrapped to the back, I like to twist the marabou, spin it, and then snip it off behind the bead, right behind the bead. And then I'm gonna move my thread back to behind the bead. And don't worry about those little fuzzies sticking up. We're going to take care of those here in just a second. I'll wrap that a little bit. Okay, so I have a tail tied in, have a nice level body, and my thread is hanging just behind my bead. Now, I mentioned that I can get 2 flies out of that. I'll show you how I get 2 flies. I like to just snip about. I like to slip, if I want to tie a second fly out of this, I like to just snip about 1 inch of the quill out. You could just tear it off, but I'll just snip that out. And then all I have to do to tie my second fly is just grab it. And now you see I have another tail I can tie. So all I did was snip out about 3/4 to 1 inch of the quill. And I use that to tie a second copy. So you can get at least two flies out of each of these marabou.
Basically, you cut out the part that we cut off.
No, I just cut it. I cut it out of the quill, Mike. I just cut it I had a new feather. I just cut it like right there.
Oh, you, okay.
Yeah, and just cut it out. Yeah. And if you have a long feather, you might get 3 out of one, the tip plus 2 midsections again. All right, so our next material is the midge diamond braid. And your thread should be hanging right behind the bead. That's okay, Rob. That is okay. All right. And to tie in the midge diamond braid, what I like to do is you could trim it, but I like to just leave kind of a long tag end here and give it just a couple of loose wraps and then just pull it to the length I want, which is about there. And then wrap it all the way back to where your tail begins. So I've wrapped all the way back to the tail. Jim, am I in focus there?
Look good.
Okay. All right. Yeah, my computer screen is not clear enough to show focus. And then take your thread back to behind the bead. So now I'm left with the midge diamond braid tied down the entire length of the body. This is a pretty quick fly to tie. When you get rolling with these, you can tie them in 3 or 4 minutes if you don't break the hackle or drop something or break your thread like I usually do. And now we simply want to wrap this midge diamond braid, make touching wraps all the way forward with it. Just one. I tied it behind the bead and tied it along the body, and then I'm wrapping it forward over that tied down part. So sort of, yes, but I don't wrap 2 layers of it. Yeah, I'm wrapping the diamond braid forward. And the smoother your underbody, the smoother the body of your diamond braid will be. But you know what? The fish could care less if there's any bumps in it. So to tie it off, I'll make a couple of wraps right behind it and then a couple of wraps in front of it. And then I snip off my excess, my tag end. And we'll take a break right there real quick. All right, how are we? We're good? All right. Next, we want to tie in one of our hackle feathers. Now, you'll notice that the feather has a curvature to it. There's a concave side and a convex side. For those of you that don't remember concave and convex, which one is this, Carlton? Time's up. That's the concave side. So yeah, that was a Jeopardy question. That was a Jeopardy question. Well, this one's dull on both sides. This dull, yeah, the shiny side stuff I've never been able to get. But so the feather curve, you basically want to put the curvature of the feather toward the shaft of the hook. Now, what I want to do here is I don't want to tie in all this webby part at the bottom. I actually want to start tying right where the webby stuff stops. So which is somewhere along right in here where all this webby stuff stops. So I'm going to strip all that off. And you don't have to strip it off, but I like to just make it a little bit cleaner. So the quill of the feather is clean. Now this curve is facing away from me right now. So I want to do one more step here. And this makes it a lot easier. I want to I want to strip off only on the right side. Now remember, the concave part's behind me right now. I want to strip off about a 1/2 inch or so of feather on the right side, because we're going to wrap it in that direction. We're going to wrap it over in that direction, and that will help it lay down a little better.
Okay, I didn't catch
Okay.
which side,
Okay, the concave side, Carlton, is away from me.
concave away from me.
So on the right side, I strip off about a 1/2 inch of the fibers.
Okay, why do we do that?
It'll help it lay down a little straighter. It won't twist. Sometimes this hackle will twist real badly on you with you. And this helps keep it from twisting. And we're going to do 2 copies of this, y'all. So we'll get a second run through it. All right, so once you get that right side stripped, and that's not a mandatory step, I want to lay it against my hook where I have just a little bit of that bare shaft showing. And again, that'll help it lay down. And then I'll take a couple of loose wraps and then tighten it up and take a couple more tight wraps. So I'm wrapping across right here.
Where's the convex?
It's away from me.
Away from
Yeah, away from me, and it will be laying against the hook. The concave side will be laid, yes, against the hook shaft. Yep. And we do that so that the feathers won't pitch forward when we wrap them, like a dry fly would. So this is not a dry fly. So I've made 2 loose wraps and 2 tight wraps right here. And let me zoom in just a little bit more. Whoa, that's nice focus. Other way, other way, other way. Right there. Okay, good. Is that sharp enough to show how poorly I'm tying, Catch?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Oh, good, thank you. All right, now, what I want to do at this point, I have 4 wraps of thread there. That's not critical, 4, 5, 6, whatever you want. I want to take that shaft of that feather, I'm going to take that quill, and I'm going to bend it up like that. And then I'm going to put a couple of good tight wraps right in front of it. So I'm going to bend it back over the feather, take a couple of wraps in the front, and then I'm going to snip it off fairly close.
Close as you can.
No, I don't usually slip. That's a good question, Chris. Chris said, is it close as you can? Probably not, because if you actually get it against the thread, it might slip out. Now, so I'm going to pull my feather forward just to kind of kink the shaft a little bit where it won't lay back. And then I'm going to take my thread and make wide wraps to the rear of the hook. Yeah, you'll notice for those of you who tie woolly boogers, we're not using a wire that we would like you typically use in a woolly bugger. We're going to use thread for this. Now, let me zoom back out so you can see the wrap a little bit better and refocus. Okay. Catch, is that back in focus?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, now I'm going to use hackle pliers because when I'm in front of people, I always drop the feather. So I'm going to use hackle pliers. You can use them or not. And what we're going to do before we start wrapping, I'm going to make 2 or 3 touching wraps of the hackle in the front. I want them to kind of pretty much touch each other. And then I'm going to spiral it back to the rear with a space between each wrap. Because you also don't want to run out of feather, depending on how long your feather is. So I'm going to make 2 or 3 close wraps in the front, and then 3 or 4 or 5 spirals to the rear, all the way back to this point. And let me do that. And here you'll see that when the way we trimmed off that, or peeled off the side of that feather, see how it lays nice and straight. So I'm going to make 2. I've got a pretty long feather, so I'm going to make 3. And at this point, I want to angle my feather like this, angle it toward the rear, and spiral back. Now this feather's a little, I'll talk about sizing the feather in a minute, but I like bushy woolly buggers. So this is just the way I like them. So I've wrapped it to the back and I haven't actually tied anything down yet, but I have it at the back. And now I'm going to take at least 2 loose wraps of thread and then tighten down on it. And then I'm going to take at least a couple more tight wraps of thread. And then I'm going to snip off, hopefully without cutting my thread, my little feather there.
How did you tie it down? You started at the back and.
Yeah, my thread was at the back, so I just held the tag end of my feather right here, Ronnie, just like that, and then wrap the thread over it.
Just around the end.
Just around the very end of it, yes. I took 2 loose wraps, tightened it, and then 2 tight wraps, so a total of 4 wraps on it.
Let's just get that ball, I think.
Let me give everybody a second to get tied off here, and I'm going to come back in, zoom back in.
Oh, yeah, sure. So am I done with this?
You make a couple of wraps and then snip off the end.
I did. I made a total of 4 on it, Carlton. 2 loose and tightened them, and then 2 tight ones. I mean, that's not critical, but just get at least 3 or 4. Because at this point, you don't want the end of that feather to slip out. Now, let me talk real quickly about sizing of the feathers. Typically on woolly boogers, they say a hook gap and a half as far as the length of the hackle. Notice my hackle in the front's fairly long. Well, you know what? That'll fish just fine. I don't care. But if I were showing, well, actually I am showing this to y'all, but if I were like showing it to like, you know, wanted a perfect example, this hackle in the front's probably a little bit long, but I like mine long anyway. I like long hackle on woolly buggers, but the textbook length is about like that. All right, so let's finish this fly off. Get a little bit of thread out and then just work your thread. I'm just weaving it back and forth forward and open spiral wraps all the way to the front. And if you don't weave it back and forth like that, you're very likely to trap a few hackles, and you might anyway, but that's okay. It really doesn't matter. Now, this does 2 things. It reinforces the hackle, and it gets the thread back to the front where you can easily do a whip finish. If you're a hand whip finisher or have a long tool, you can actually whip finish it back here in the back, which is what I do. So whip finish in the front. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Turn whip finish. And that's it. And we're going to tie another copy of this, so we'll get a little bit more practice. Flip, good. Peter, good. Is that, oh, Clifton, just saw you come on.
Hey, Bill.
Yep. Are y'all good?
Great.
Good.
Yep.
Basically a little, basically a standard woolly booger, except a jig hook, and we don't use wire because it's so small. You could use wire, but I just find it quicker and easier to use the thread for it. And sometimes I'll actually whip finish here instead of bringing the thread back forward. You don't get the protection of the overwrap of the thread, but it's faster. So just kind of. And I fish these just like a woolly booger, just strip it under the water. Walk around. Now we're gonna start a second copy here in just a second.
Need a little more, need a little more. Come down, yeah, all right. Got that right there. That's fine. I'll make- Yeah, always change it all. This way with this.
No, you sure?
I'm gonna let it go around. See, that's good. Yeah, that's what you want.
No, it's not right. I need to watch him. I
You can also do when it's small, it's easier to
All right. Give everybody a few minutes. We will start a second copy of it.
over there. This is big enough you can do that. Here.
Okay, yeah, we're gonna do another one here in just a second.
I want this to be.
What do you call it?
What's that? Usually small ones like this are called micro-buggers because the woolly bugger's typically a 6, 8, 10 size hook. You know, they're 2 to 3 inches long. It's a big 14, but it's. Okay. We're going, let me show you what you can do with, if you don't have the right marabou for a fly like this. If you just got the kind of stringy marabou, let me show you what you can do. And most of you probably know this already, but I'm going to do it anyway. Here's a big marabou plum. And I've got more beads and hooks up here if y'all need any. And if I were to make the tail of my fly, let me zoom out a little bit more. Y'all can see my computer case there. Let me refocus you in just a second. You can see if I were to make a tail out of this very end of the feather, notice what it would look like. This very straight little, not wispy feathers at all. Now, if you like your buggers like that, tie them like that. But I like mine to have a little more movement in the water. So what I could do here is I could notice that I've got all this straight stuff out here, but I've got nice webby stuff here. Well, I'll grab it right in front of that webby stuff, and just with my thumbnail, I can just pick the ends of that off. And it's really random, so it doesn't look like it's cut. And I'm just picking the ends off like that. And now I should, it's almost like a magic trick, rabbit comes out of the sleeve. I should have a fairly bushy little piece of marabou that I can tie the type of tail that I like to tie with it, just which is kind of a bushy, wispy kind of marabou. So you don't have to have woolly bugger marabou. You can always just trim it down and use that. All right, let's get hooked up again with another hook. If I can get focused here. There we go. Hook and a bead. Get our bead on our hook. And again, this is a 1/8 inch bead. And these are brass beads. So if you want a little heavier sink rate, you can use a tungsten bead, add a little lead wire to it. You can use a 5/32, an even bigger bead. Now, one thing about some of these barbed hooks, the bead will kind of jam on the barb. You can just kind of get your fingernail and pop it over it. And this one's not doing it. There it goes. Right. Yep, there it goes. Just pop it over the barb. Yeah, and if I were tying this for the little Missouri, I bought some hooks last week. They were barbless fulling mill. Fulling mill makes a long shank jig hook that's barbless. So it has a long shank like this, except it's already barbless. But I use these a lot for bluegill around here. And so I like the barb for that. All right, so let's get our thread started behind the bead. Go all the way back to the bend of the hook, which is on this hook just above the barb. So I'm stopping just above the barb, and then I can spiral forward. You don't have to make touching wraps. Spiral forward to behind the bead. Now, even though this is a good feather, this is a really good marabou feather, I'm gonna cut that middle section out and use it like I showed you a while ago. So I'm gonna kind of preen the feather out straight. Then I'm gonna cut this big stuff out at the base down here. And then I'm gonna go up about 3/4 to an inch, roughly about right there, and cut that piece out. And see, I still have enough left here I still have enough left there for a tail. But I'm going to use the piece I just cut out. This is the piece I just cut out. So I'm going to just grab it. And I'm going to prune it just a little bit. Now, this is also how you can modify your tail. You see look at my tail. Notice it's a little thick. Nobody's looking at my tail up here, but it is a little thick. It is a little thick. That's right. So if it's a little thicker than you like, just don't use some of the feathers. So I can just pull some more of those off and just make it a little bit thinner. Yeah, and that's probably about right. So again, about a hook shaft long, transfer that to the back. And as you wrap, it helps to hold that feather up and towards you. Note kind of like that. I'm looking down from the top now. Hold it up and towards you, and that keeps it on top of the hook shank. And so I'll wrap all the way back to the barb, and then come back forward, and I'm left with that small tag end just to trim off. And I didn't get quite back to the barbs. So I'm going to go back and get all the way back to the barb. Yeah. And again, our midge diamond braid is going to cover up all those little fuzzies, or I hope they will. All right, midge diamond braid. I like to leave tight right behind the bead. I just put a couple of loose wraps and then pull it back. And you don't have to make touching wraps of thread. Just wrap it all the way back to the start of your tail and then bring your thread back forward.
Yeah, thank you.
What do you need? Give him some grizzly. It's a lot better.
You'll see it better.
Yeah, here's some right here. Yeah, I'm gonna use a grizzly on this one. Yeah, I've got more hackle and more diamond braid up here if you need it. So. We've got grizzly up here. I'm actually gonna tie with grizzly this time.
You got it in green?
Chris has the green. All right, now, if you remember, we're just going to simply wrap this diamond braid forward. Make touching wraps of the diamond braid forward. And if you run out of diamond braid, I have more. Flip, Peter, I think I sent y'all plenty, so it should be good shape.
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, so we'll wrap up to right behind the bead. Hold my braid at an angle. A couple of wraps behind and a couple of wraps in front. And trim off our tag.
A little bit at a time. A little better than my first. Oh, really?
Everybody have another piece of hackle? Good. I'm going to use a grizzly hackle this time because some of you have grizzly. We ran a little short on the green. So I'm going to use a grizzly hackle, but notice it's just the same. Let me zoom out a little bit. You'll notice it has a concave side. It's pretty obvious on this feather. It's much more pronounced. And I'm going to get rid of all this webby stuff down at the bottom down here. And just like I did before, I'm going to strip off about a ½ inch on the right side with the concave side facing away from me. So I stripped off the webby stuff. I put the concave side away from me and I strip off about another ½ inch. Again, that's not a mandatory step. It just helps keep it from twisting. And when you place that feather on there, leave a little bit of that bare stem above your thread wrap. So say I have a 1/16 or so of an inch right there above the thread wrap. Loose wrap. That's a little bit too much. There. Loose wrap, a couple of tight wraps. And then I bend up that feather shaft and a couple of wraps in front. Yeah, I bent that feather shaft. Let me rotate my vise. I bent it back and then made a couple of wraps in front of that bend. And that helps bind that feather down where it won't slip out. All right. And then I'm going to trim that tag end of that feather off, but not all the way against the thread. I'm going to leave a little, you can see I leave a little bit of a gap there, a little bit of a tag end. Once your feather's tied in, don't forget to move your thread to the back.
Almost forgot to do that.
Yep, I have done that before, Peter, and wrap my feather back there, and there's my thread sitting at the front of the hook. So I have done that.
That makes sense.
All right, so let's grab that. Let's wrap that feather. And remember, we're going to make 2 or 3 touching wraps right behind the bead. 1, 2, 3 touching wraps. That gives me a nice face to push water. And then I'm going to spiral slightly as I wrap toward the rear of the hook. This is a really bushy one here. This is a Gene Taylor Micro-Bugger. And then as I hold, Ronnie, this is what I was doing a while ago. Ronnie, just see I was holding the feather up like this and then just wrapping over it once, twice, do a couple of more. I like 3 or 4 because I don't like for it to come loose, and then trim it off. If any of you remember Gene showing us his version of a woolly bugger, he likes that olive and grizzly pattern. And I've used it on Little Mo quite a bit, caught a bunch of trout on it. And then remember, we just weave our thread through the hackle back and forth. And if you trap a few, it's fine. Until you get back to the front, and then a few turns and a whip finish. I did a 5-turn whip finish, and that's it. If you do this grizzly and olive, when you fish it in clear water, it has kind of a silvery olive look to it. So it's really very bait fish looking versus the all olive is good too. Here's the all olive. So. And like I say, I've tied these down to about a 16, but this is really about as small as I like to tie these. You need another hackle, Mike?
I want this thread above the. I'm messing around the That's really good. What is that? Oh, yeah.
All right. Flip, Peter, how's it going? Cliff? Oh, yeah. Good. Peter, you have anything up there that will eat this?
Yeah, I think just about everything.
About everything. I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah, I like this fly.
Yeah, it's good. It's a quick tie. You know, you like I say, you get your materials laid out. You can probably turn them out in less than 5 minutes each. And
Yeah. And I think a lot more fish, like you said, panfish are going to hit this.
Bin wrap. Yeah.
Nice, Bill. Thank you.
All right, good, Clip.
Thank you.
Yeah, John was telling us he's done fabric paint for the body before. If you want to color body, and then let it dry and wrap the body on it. But I fish these under an indicator or under or just stripping. I like stripping much better. But they are light enough to fish under an indicator. So.
This one I got. I don't know. Is that too short or no?
All right, gents, that's about all I know tonight. Peter, we'll talk again about a tying session. So.
Okay.
Do you have camera gear to get close?
Me?
Yeah.
No.
You have do you have an iPhone?
Yeah, I just have an iPhone.
No, that's what I use. This is not an iPhone, but that's what we've used for years was my iPhone. So anyway, I mean, it's no worries either way, but it'd be fun.
Well, thanks. Yeah, great class.
Yeah, good. All right, Flip.
Thank you.
See y'all soon. Okay, guys.
Good night.
Good night.